Did you know that Oregon growers are dumping over 1 million pounds of produce each season instead of selling it? That's enough fresh fruits and veggies to fill more than 40 tractor trailers. What could force farmers to toss ripe tomatoes, squash, and lettuce straight into compost? Today's video uncovers how recent rule changes left small farms unable to water or sell their harvest, leading to mass shutdowns across the state. Oregon's farms are facing a crisis of unprecedented scale. Fresh fruits and vegetables that once nourished families and fed tables across the state are now being plowed under, tossed into compost piles, or burned because growers cannot legally sell what they cultivate. Small and mid-sized operations that supply farmers markets, roadside stands, and community-supported agriculture boxes have watched ripe tomatoes, squash, berries, and lettuce turn to waste when harvest time arrives. That waste is not the result of lack of demand or poor quality. It comes from new or newly enforced rules that cut off water, pile on costs, and limit the ability of farmers to earn a living from the land. As regulations multiply on water use, waste handling, labor standards, and more, those who grow food in Oregon find themselves caught in a web of mandates that make farming financially impossible. When crops cannot be irrigated, fields lie fallow. When produce cannot be sold, it is discarded. When farm workers cannot be managed or paid under clear rules, staffing dries up. Together, these pressures have shuttered hundreds of family farms in just the last few years and threaten many more. For decades, Oregon's water rights framework treated domestic wells and agricultural irrigation separately. Homeowners drawing from private wells could pump up to 15,000 gallons per day for household needs, drinking water, showering, filling a swimming pool without a permit. Commercial and industrial users, such as car washes or small factories, could draw up to 5,000 gallons daily under the same exemption. Meanwhile, farmers irrigating crops applied for agricultural water rights, which carried higher thresholds and focused on preserving stream flows and groundwater levels. That balance recognized that growing food is vital and that the portion of total water use devoted to small-scale vegetable gardens was minimal compared to urban lawns or large vineyards. In late 2024, the Oregon Water Resources Department shifted course. A new interpretation declared that any water drawn from a domestic well for irrigation, no matter how small the garden, counts against the 5,000-gallon commercial exemption. Growers selling at farmers markets or through CSA shares would lose domestic status. They faced fines up to $1,500 a day, orders to shut off wells, and even criminal charges if they continued watering. The change arrived without public notice or impact studies. One week, seed trays thrived. The next, regulatory officers knocked on greenhouse doors with citations. Market gardeners operating on 1 to 5 acres bore the brunt of this enforcement. These growers typically plant high-value vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, salad greens, on small plots that require careful, daily watering, especially during summer heat spikes. Research from Oregon State University Extension shows yields can drop by 40 to 80% when irrigation stops for even a few days. Young plants wilt in the heat, root systems fail to establish, and harvest volumes plummet. Growers rush to apply for full irrigation permits. Fees for those permits range from $1,500 to over $5,000, depending on acreage and region, and completion of an environmental review could take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. Many small operators lack the capital to pay upfront costs or the patience to wait through long backlogs. Facing stalled permits, they pulled up seedlings and left raised beds to go fallow. By the start of the 2025 harvest season, dozens of farmers reported yields so low that they could not pay for seed, soil amendments, or fuel costs. Produce that did reach maturity was seized by watermasters as unpermitted commercial product and ordered to be destroyed rather than sold. In Baker County, a family growing heirloom tomatoes on 4 acres watched their entire crop go to waste because state inspectors deemed their well domestic use only. At the same time, a local winery in the same county continued to pump 5,000 gallons per day for vineyard irrigation without permits under the industrial exemption. That disparity fueled anger among farmers who saw rules written for one type of business applied differently to another. To address that gap, legislators introduced House Bill 3372 in early 2025. After marathon committee hearings stretching over 2 days, the measure won bipartisan support in the Oregon House. The compromise allowed domestic well owners a half-acre of drip-irrigated lettuce or berries under efficient scheduling could use less than 3,000 gallons per day, even in midsummer. Yet the limit remained below the 5,000 gallons allowed for cafes, breweries, and other non-agricultural businesses. Critics pointed out that a roadside bakery could water landscape plantings with 5,000 gallons, while a gardener growing vegetables for local tables had to ration after 3,000 gallons. Even more troubling, enforcement mechanisms remained opaque. Water masters were charged with monitoring usage but lacked resources to inspect daily meter readings. Growers worried that neighbor disputes or random patrols could still trigger fines if reported consumption ever exceeded 3,000 gallons, even momentarily. While HB 3372 moved through the legislature, other bills threatened to tighten the screws on all farms. Senate Bill 1154 instructed multiple agencies to identify any area with potential groundwater quality problems, near landfills, industrial sites, or high-density housing, and impose special restrictions on all well users there. Farms in those zones could face reduced draw limits, mandatory seasonal shutdowns, and requirements for costly treatment or filtration systems. Under this proposal, even growers with senior irrigation rights could be subject to tiered cutbacks during dry years or in response to local water quality alarms. For farms drawing from deep aquifers historically considered safe, the new law would erode predictability and require constant testing. In tandem, House Bill 3419 would mandate installation of flow meters and reporting devices on every well used for irrigation or commercial purposes. These meters, which cost $250 to $350 each, must be calibrated annually at roughly $150 per device. That adds a fixed infrastructure cost of $400 per year per well before counting monitoring fees. For a farm with 3 domestic wells covering separate plots, annual meter upkeep could top $1,200. That is not counting staff time spent downloading data, filing reports, and responding to any agency inquiries. These overlapping water measures arrived as growers were still grappling with waste management rules affecting dairy and livestock operations. In mid-2024, the Oregon Department of Agriculture revised definitions around concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs. Under the new guidance, any operation housing more than 2 lactating animals, goats, sheep, or cows, qualified as a CAFO. Previously, CAFO classification had applied only to large feedlots with hundreds of animals. The revised rule triggered requirements for multi-stage wastewater treatment systems, including settling ponds, filtration units, and runoff containment dikes. Estimates for installing even a basic lagoon and filter setup start around $50,000, with annual maintenance running $5,000 to $10,000. Many pasture-based goat dairies, which relied on rotational grazing and minimal fencing, suddenly faced retrofit bills that dwarfed annual incomes. Operators who could not finance upgrades sold off herds, shut down cheesemaking operations, or converted barns into storage units for machinery. By the end of 2024, at least 25 small dairy producers reported ceasing milk sales. That CAFO rule was challenged in state court and partially struck down in November 2024. A rural circuit judge ruled the Department of Agriculture had exceeded its statutory authority in rewriting CAFO definitions, noting the original law targeted high-density feedlots, not pasture systems with minimal runoff. The ruling restored some hope, but it arrived too late for several operators who had already dissolved their partnerships or sold farmland. The court decision also did not prevent the department from proposing similar definitions again, leaving future legal battles and uncertainty on the horizon. Labor issues compounded those struggles. House Bill 2548, which advanced through the Labor Committee in spring 2025, proposed creating a Farm Worker Standards Board with the power to set minimum wages, benefits, and working conditions across Oregon's agricultural sector. That board would also eliminate at-will employment for farm workers, requiring just cause for termination. Growers argued that such rules, though intended to protect workers, would force farms to reduce seasonal hiring or curtail hours to avoid overtime pay thresholds. Historical evidence from other states supports those fears. After Washington state's farm worker overtime law took effect in 2019, small fruit and vegetable farms reported cutting labor hours by up to 12%. Smaller operations operate on margins as thin as 5 to 7%. Paying overtime could absorb 15 to 20% of net revenue in a harvest month, making it impossible to recruit enough labor for critical tasks like frost protection, orchard pruning, or post-harvest sorting. Growers have already begun experimenting with rotating crews on shorter shifts to avoid overtime triggers, but that approach increases training time, raises safety risks, and reduces overall productivity. At the same time, input costs for farms have surged. Since 2021, the price of diesel fuel, fertilizer, and animal feed has jumped by 25% on average, driven by global supply chain disruptions and inflation. Interest rates on operating loans rose from near zero to over 6%, doubling debt servicing costs for farms. For 1 in 5 operations, annual loan interest payments now exceed net revenues, according to the latest USDA survey. That financial squeeze leaves no cushion for regulatory compliance costs or unexpected weather events. Those weather risks grew more acute with back-to-back crises in 2023 and 2024. The bootleg fire of 2023 blasted through nearly 500,000 acres in southern Oregon, destroying fences, barns, and log timberland. Agricultural fields near the fire perimeters suffered ash fallout and soil degradation. The oak fire of 2024, sparked by lightning in the Rogue Valley, burned over 30,000 acres of pasture and grazing land. Ranchers lost grazing income and faced costly cleanup. In both instances, emergency declarations allowed limited disaster relief, but applications for relief grants were complex and funding limited. Many growers chose to pay cleanup and repair costs out of pocket rather than endure months of paperwork and delayed reimbursements. Geographically, the greatest impact has fallen on the Willamette Valley, the state's agricultural heart, and the Rogue Basin, known for specialty crops and small dairies. In those regions, more than 30% of farms rely on domestic wells under exempt status. When enforcement changed, that entire group faced a sudden shutoff of core operations. Meanwhile, large-scale irrigators drawing from senior water rights in the Deschutes Basin or Klamath Project maintained access, but still faced the 2025 revival of the 2001 Bucket Brigade water shutoff. That earlier crisis, when endangered fish mandates forced federal curtailment of irrigation, returned as drought and habitat protection combined to limit flows. Ranchers downstream of Upper Klamath Lake watched summer irrigation orders delayed by weeks, creating stress on cattle operations and forage production. The economic fallout extends beyond fields. Equipment dealers note a 20% drop in tractor and implement sales over the past 3 years. Local feed mills report decreased throughput, forcing some to cut staff or reduce operating hours. Rural hardware stores, which once thrived on fence posts, irrigation pipe, and repair parts, now face empty shelves and shrinking revenues. Farmers markets across the state saw stall vacancies jump from under 5% in 2022 to over 15% in 2025, diminishing the weekly gathering places that serve as both commerce and community. Community-supported agriculture programs, which once welcomed new growers each season, now operate waitlists rather than adding operations. In response, nonprofits and cooperatives have mobilized. Meet My Neighbor Productions, a new nonprofit, fields emergency relief grants to cover permit fees, meter installations, and legal counsel. Extension agents at Oregon State University host weekly webinars on navigating water rights, low-cost irrigation technology, and grant writing. A coalition of farm bureaus and environmental groups sponsored rural town hall meetings to discuss pragmatic solutions. Tiered water permit fees based on acreage, temporary emergency exemptions following wildfires, and technical assistance for constructed wetland wastewater treatment that can cost under $10,000 compared to mechanical systems running $50,000 or more. That coalition also pushed for clearer legislative language exempting irrigation where the end consumer is an individual or community entity, protecting food banks, school gardens, and CSAs. Despite these efforts, policy debates remain polarized. Environmental groups argue that loosening domestic well rules, even to 3,000 gallons, will pave the way for unsustainable groundwater use and harm salmon runs. Farmers counter that irrigation for food crops constitutes a fraction of total groundwater withdrawal, pointing to data showing urban use and orchard irrigation account for far larger volumes. Some propose flexible block permits that allow up to 7,500 gallons during defined peak periods, paired with mandatory leak detection and reporting. Others call for permanent statutory exemptions for small-scale agriculture, insulating CSAs and market gardens from water rights enforcement altogether. Innovative on-farm practices offer additional pathways. Trials of drought-tolerant crop varieties in the Salem area show yield reductions of only 10% compared to standard varieties, while using 30% less water. Real-time soil moisture sensors linked to automated drip systems can cut irrigation needs by up to 40%. Wastewater reuse projects, treating brewery effluent or municipal reclaimed water, present another avenue but remain hampered by overlapping regulations from the Department of Environmental Quality and the Water Resources Department. Pilot grants funded 2 demonstration sites, but scaling those models requires streamlined permitting and additional funding. Community engagement has emerged as a critical factor. Public awareness campaigns highlight the paradox of fields of healthy produce left to rot amid rising grocery prices. Visual storytelling through social media posts, local news segments, and photo exhibits shows tomato fields bulldozed under, berry bins burned, and orchard ties rotting in wet ground. Food banks partner with small growers to rescue seconds produce, arranging emergency shipments before regulators demand disposal. In some counties, local commissioners have passed resolutions urging state lawmakers to prioritize small-scale agriculture in water policy. Looking ahead to the remainder of 2025, Oregon's legislature faces a choice: craft nuanced policies that safeguard water resources while preserving the viability of small farms, or proceed with blanket regulations that risk driving family growers from the land. The final vote on House Bill 3,372 will determine whether domestic well irrigation is restored to a level that supports market gardens. Amendments to Senate Bill 1154 and House Bill 3419 could carve out exemptions based on farm size, crop type, or economic impact. Farm worker standards proposals may include thresholds to exempt operations under a certain acreage or revenue, protecting family farms while extending labor safeguards to larger employers. Overlooked in this debate is the fact that family farms make up 96% of Oregon's agricultural operations and account for 84% of farmland, according to the latest USDA census. Their disappearance would not just shrink the state's food supply, it would erode rural economies, cultural traditions, and local stewardship of land and water. The lessons unfolding in Oregon resonate across the western United States. States with similar water compacts, California, Washington, Idaho, face the same struggle to balance conservation goals with the need for local food production. As climate change intensifies drought cycles and wildfires, water management frameworks must adapt. Policymakers need data-driven solutions that differentiate between irrigation types, farm sizes, and end uses, rather than one-size-fits-all rules. Otherwise, small growers, often pioneers of sustainable practices, will be the unintended casualties of well-intentioned regulations. Their loss diminishes biodiversity, reduces economic resilience in rural communities, and narrows consumer choice. In that broader context, Oregon's response will serve as both warning and model. If legislators can align resource stewardship with agricultural viability by calibrating water rights, tailoring labor rules, and targeting environmental protections, they will chart a path for sustainable local food systems under stress. If they fail, the state risks becoming a cautionary tale of over-regulation, driving farmers from the land, fields lying fallow, and fresh produce feeding compost piles instead of families. The stakes extend beyond state lines. In a world where global supply chains face increasing shocks, from pandemics to geopolitical conflicts, resilient local agriculture becomes not a luxury but a necessity. Ensuring that small farms can thrive amid environmental and economic pressures is essential to food security, community health, and the preservation of rural ways of life. That reality underscores the importance of continued engagement. Consumers can support local growers by buying at farmers markets, signing up for CSA shares, and speaking up at public hearings. Advocacy groups encourage writing letters to legislators, attending town halls, and sharing stories on social media. Visual evidence, photos of discarded harvests, charts tracking farm closures, maps showing groundwater levels, gives concrete weight to policy debates. Research institutions and extension services play a critical role, partnering with growers to test low-cost irrigation technologies, develop natural wastewater treatment systems, apply for grants, and form cooperatives that share costs for infrastructure and legal services. Ultimately, the coming months will reveal whether Oregon can reconcile resource management with agricultural viability. House Bill 3372's fate, along with amendments to other measures, will determine whether small growers regain the tools to water, grow, and sell food without facing crippling fines or disposal orders. Lawmakers will decide whether to protect groundwater and habitat through targeted, flexible rules or broad mandates that risk wiping out the very farms that feed the state. In the balance lies not just the future of Oregon's agricultural landscape, but a test case for how societies manage competing needs for water, land, and labor in an era of heightened environmental sensitivity. The outcome will shape rural communities, influence policy across the West, and affect what ends up on dinner tables for years to come. Thanks for sticking with this deep dive into Oregon's farming challenges. If you found this useful, hit like and subscribe for more updates on local agriculture and policy changes. Share this video with anyone who cares about where their food comes from, and let's keep the conversation going.